Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in once again to the Queen Ahmadiyyah show. So as you're coming in, please feel free to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Be sure to click the notification bell and click the word all so that you're notified each time I go live. Also, don't forget that you can follow me on Instagram at Queen Ahmadiyyah, on Twitter at DGoddess27, and Monday through Fridays at 9 a.m. on FlyNubianQueenTV.com for Queen Ahmadiyyah with your morning wake-up call. So, tonight is True Crime Night, as we know. So I'm going to be discussing the serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay? Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 men from 1978 till 1991. Hello, Nick Joe, Triple Darkness, Erica 202 US. And so, the first person he killed was in 1978. Hello, Tori. Thank you. Hello, Teresa. Okay, so, hello, Mr. Mercedes. Hello, Donna Black. How are you doing? Okay, I'm glad you got in too. Hello, Susan, Leroy. Hello, hello. Hello, Vanessa, Chili Willy from Philly. The Derek Muhammad Show. Tori Bolden. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tori. Truth Heals. Okay, so listen, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to come in earlier. Hey, Jawara. But I was preoccupied. I had a lot of work to do. So anyway, as I was saying, Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Ohio. Okay, he lived there with his family, his parents. His parents divorced, and he claims to have had abandonment issues. But anyway, his whole weird behavior started when he was just a kid, okay? When he was 8 years old, he found the decaying corpse of a squirrel, and he was curious as to what it looked like on the inside. So he took it home and took it apart and was very interested and intrigued and fascinated by the bones, okay? After that, he began going out looking for roadkill. Now, he would go out and find things like dead dogs, dead raccoons, you know, animals that were killed on the side of the road. Hey, Luke. And he would take these things home and carve them open and then play around with the bones. Now, this fetish that he had for cutting open dead corpses of animals and being so fascinated with the bones, he carried that on into his adulthood. And as he became an adult, his interest then turned to humans. And at the age of 14, he also had a sexual relationship with another boy in his neighborhood, and that's when he realized that he was gay. So that is why most, not all, but most of his victims were gay. And he would meet them at bars and clubs, okay, where the LGBTQ community would hang out. Now, his first victim, Jeffrey killed the first victim named Stephen Hicks, a 16-year-old hitchhiker in 1978 when Jeffrey at the time was only 18 years old. He said that he'd had a fantasy about meeting a hitchhiker and, you know, just picking them up and taking them off and killing them. So one day as he's riding along, he sees this 16-year-old who's hitchhiking. This is in Ohio. And this guy is hitchhiking, Stephen Hicks is, hitchhiking to a summer fest, okay? So that was the way a lot of teens got around back then, was from hitchhiking. So anyway, he gave the kid a ride, took him back to the home where he lived, because both of his parents had actually moved out after the divorce and left him living there. So he had the home to himself. He took the kid there, and they had some drinks and, you know, were talking and everything and hanging out. And then when the boy decided that he was ready to go, Jeffrey got mad and didn't want him to leave. So he killed the boy. He bashed him upside the head with a barbell, killed him, and then cut his body up, dismembered it, put it into trash bags, like 5 different bags, put them in the back of his car, and was going off to dispose of them, right? Now, he took the boy's body down into a crawl space in the home to cut him up. Then put the body in bags, as I said, and then was on his way to dispose of the body when he was pulled over by a police officer. Now, the police officer, after talking to Jeffrey, he shined his flashlight into the back seat and saw all those trash bags, and he wanted to know what was in them. So Jeffrey lied and told him that it was just trash that he hadn't had a chance to take to the dumpster yet. So the police officer let him go. He then took the body and the remains out to the middle of the woods, where he proceeded to crush the bones, and then he spun around in a 360 circle, scattering the bones as he did. Okay, now after he did this, he didn't commit another murder for 9 years. Now keep in mind, he was 18 years old when this happened. So shortly thereafter, he ended up moving to Milwaukee, Wisconsin with his grandmother. So he started, going out on the prowl looking for men. So he picked up one young man and took him to a hotel, invited him back to his hotel, where he ended up killing him. He drugged him with some type of concoction that he put into the alcohol that the man was drinking, some type of drugs. And so after he drugged him, he proceeded to kill him. And then after he killed him and had sex with his dead corpse, he put the body inside of a suitcase. And then as he was leaving the hotel, he actually got the bus boy to help him with the luggage. And then when he went outside to get into a taxi, he also got the cab driver to help him load the suitcase into the trunk. Now, it was so heavy, the cab driver asked him, "This is really heavy. What do you have in here? A dead body?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And then he started laughing. Little did the man know that he was so serious, okay? Little did he know. Now, in 1985, Jeffrey started visiting gay bathhouses. He would go there to meet men and have sex with them in the bathhouses. But then he was banned shortly thereafter, after rumors started to swirl about the fact that he was drugging these young men that he was having these encounters with. So they banned him from coming there. Now, and then here's another thing too. He was arrested once because he took a 13-year-old boy, because let's not forget, they never really talk about the fact that he was also a pedophile. Okay, he was a pedophile because one of the victims that he molested and then killed was 14 years old. And then he also was arrested for having a 13-year-old boy that he lured to his apartment. And then, because eventually he moved out of his grandmother's house because he got tired of going to hotels. I guess that was too inconvenient and too much trouble. So he wanted to have free reign to do whatever he wanted to do with these men. And so he went and got an apartment. Now, he lured a 13-year-old boy to his home, and he ended up molesting him and taking nude photographs of him. So he was caught because the boy got away. So he was caught, and then he eventually was arrested for that. And I think he was sentenced to like 12 months. Now, when he was released, he was put on probation. Funny thing is, the whole time he was on probation, not one probation officer ever bothered to check up on him or do like a pop-up visit to his apartment or anything. So he had no one supervising his whereabouts or his behaviors. Okay? Now, on June the 24th of 1990, Eddie Smith, this was a young black man who met Dahmer at one of the gay clubs that he would frequent. And absolutely, triple darkness, white privilege, yes. So Eddie Smith met Jeffrey Dahmer at one of the gay clubs that he would frequent, and they became pretty good friends. And so Eddie trusted him. Now, Eddie was trying to become a model. So one day, after they had been friendly for a while, the bartender at this bar where they would come to, the bartender said that Eddie would sometimes leave and he would make money because Jeffrey would pay him like $100 to take photos of him. So one night they're in the bar, and so Eddie tells the bartender he has to go. And the bartender asks him, "Where are you going?" And he turns around and points to Jeffrey Dahmer. So, and the bartender says, "Okay, so well, when you get back, or when you leave, call me to let me know, how you're doing. Well, he never heard from the guy again, because when the guy went to Jeffrey Dahmer's house, of course, Jeffrey Dahmer killed him. Okay? And then there was one man that he met at a bus stop. Now, this man was simply someone who was in town visiting from Upper Michigan. But Jeffrey Dahmer met this man on the bus stop, and some kind of way, he lured him to his apartment, and he ended up killing him as well. Now, what he would do when he would kill these men is sometimes he would perform oral sex on them. He would do that first. Now, he would drug them, and so they would be in like a drug-induced, not a coma, but they would be unconscious from the drugs that he'd given them, right? The concoction. And so while they were unconscious, he would do things like, have oral sex with them. Sometimes he would just have regular sex with them or whatever. And then he had gotten to the point where he would listen to their heartbeats. So he had trained himself to know when they were coming out of the drug-induced states, because he could tell, because their heart would beat differently. This is what he said himself. He said their heartbeat or their heart rate would start to change. And he could tell that they were about to wake up out of the, from under the sedation. So that is when he knew that he would have to kill them. So he would then strangle them and proceed to dismember them. And he would eat their body. Now, the parts that he loved to eat would be the thighs, the heart, the liver, and the biceps. He said he enjoyed eating the muscles from the bodies. Okay? So sick and disgusting. And sometimes he would cut off parts of their body and keep the body parts in his home for days. Sometimes he would freeze them or put them in the tub with, lots of ice. And he would shower in the tub with these things in there. He said the way he would do it is he would take cold showers so that the ice wouldn't melt. He would also neatly wrap up body parts and store them in separate packages in his freezer. Very sick and disgusting. Now, there was a 14-year-old Vietnamese boy that Jeffrey had lured to his home. And he then proceeded to drug the boy. He injected him with something to drug him, right? Then he left. I guess he went to the store to get something he needed. I don't know. But he left the kid there by himself. So the kid actually was able to escape. He ran out of the house, out of the apartment. And when he escaped, there were two girls who found him. Two black girls found him, right? And so they called the police. Now, the kid was kind of disoriented because, keep in mind, he had been drugged. But he was able to tell them that, he was trying to get away from this man. So they called the police. Well, when the police showed up, of course, they're not going to listen to two black girls and a Vietnamese boy who's 14 over Jeffrey Dahmer, because Jeffrey Dahmer is a white man. And let's keep in mind that these serial killers like him, they're very methodical. They're very, often they have, are well spoken, and they are very deceptive. So he simply told the police that this is his friend and that his friend was drunk. That's what he told them. It was his friend and that his friend was drunk. And the boy kept telling them he didn't want to go back to the apartment. He didn't want to go with Jeffrey. But nevertheless, the police escorted the boy back with Jeffrey, because the boy was trying to fight, not trying to go. So they literally helped Jeffrey Dahmer take the poor child back to his apartment. Now, here's the thing. When they got there, I don't know how it didn't strike them as odd that the apartment had a pungent, loud smell, like the smell of decay, because in fact, he had dead body parts in there at that time. And in fact, the neighbors and the building manager had all complained about the smell and the odor, and this pungent, foul smell that they continuously would smell coming from Jeffrey's apartment. So the police admitted later that they smelled it, but I guess he told them some BS story about what it was. And so they foolishly sent this child right back into the lion's den, okay? Of course, Jeffrey gave him another injection as soon as the police left, and the kid died. And the ironic thing is, that same kid that tried to escape, Jeffrey had actually abducted his brother years prior. So how crazy is that? Now, finally, the landlord, a man by the name of Sopakleba Princewell, he ended up calling Jeffrey. He was the landlord. He ended up calling Jeffrey, telling him about the complaints of the foul odor, and Jeffrey simply blamed it on the freezer and his fish tank. And at this time, he had a tub filled with torsos, headless torsos, okay, that had been stripped of flesh. This is what he had in the apartment at that time. And that is why everybody was smelling that odor. So then, in 1991, Jeffrey lured 32-year-old Tracy Edwards to his apartments. And here's the thing. Jeffrey had lots of bolts on his doors. He had different sets of locks on the doors. And so whenever he would get someone in there, once they were inside and he locked his door, he felt safe, he felt bold, and he felt powerful because he knew that he had them now under his control, because with all those locks on the door, they wouldn't be able to get out. So that gave him the confidence. And then he turned into a whole nother person. He would turn into a whole nother person. That whole nice demeanor that he had, that he used to lure them into the apartment, well, that would quickly turn into an evil person, right? And so he would drug them, and as I said, then he would dismember them. Now, in the case of Tracy Edwards, on July the 22nd of 1991, Jeffrey lured him there under the pretext that they were going to, you know, just have sex or have some drinks or whatever. So he got him there. And then, now, Tracy Edwards says that when he got there in the apartment, Jeffrey Dahmer started playing the movie The Exorcist. And he kept playing this movie, and as he was playing it, he kept rewinding back to the scene where the priest commanded the demon to leave Reagan, the child who was possessed, and he kept telling the demon to come into him. And Tracy said, because Tracy's one who escaped. Now, Tracy later said that while he was watching this scene from The Exorcist, Jeffrey looked as though he was in some type of hypnotic trance. Okay? Clearly, this was the demon in him surfacing, if you ask me. So anyway, and for those of you who don't know, if you haven't seen the documentary about the movie The Exorcist, they say that many people who watched that movie, even in the theaters, those people became possessed. Some people passed out. You know, some people said they experienced paranormal activity. Even while they were making the movie, strange phenomenon started to occur on the set. For example, the room that was supposed to belong to Reagan, the girl who was possessed, that room, or the part, you know, of the set that was supposed to be used as that room, caught on fire while they were filming. The fire department came and put out the blaze and had no idea how the fire even started. A couple of people from the movie actually died before the movie was even done. So that movie is very demonic and filled with satanic imagery and all of those things. And the fact that he was watching that before he tried to kill somebody, that was clearly a ritual that he would always do before killing his victims. Because the police said themselves, one of the Milwaukee police officers said himself, I think his name was Patrick Kennedy, I believe that's the officer's name, said that he had rituals that he would do prior to killing his victims. So nevertheless, while he was sitting there watching this, he had given Tracy a concoction to drink. They called on demonic spirits with the extras. Yes, absolutely they did, Eris. Absolutely. That's why I don't watch demonic movies. But so anyway, he gave Tracy something to drink that was, of course, drugged. And so Tracy said once he tasted it, it tasted weird to him. It tasted funny. And he started feeling weird. Like he started feeling like he was going to pass out, started feeling queasy. So he immediately knew something was wrong. And also by the fact that he's sitting there watching him watch this demonic movie and he's starting to act crazy and looking like he's in a trance. So, of course, that frightened him. So he jumped up. He ran to the door, but there were so many locks on the door. There was like 6 or 7 locks on the door. And he didn't know which one, you know, was which one to hit. But luckily, he hit the right lock. God must have been with him that day, because he hit the right lock and he ran out of there. And as he ran and fled down the street, he flagged down a police officer and told the officer what had happened. And he still had the handcuff, because that's another thing. Dahmer had tried to handcuff him, I guess as he was trying to escape maybe, but he had the handcuff on one of his wrists. And so the police were trying to take it off, but they didn't have the key. So they went back to Dahmer's apartment to find out, you know, what happened, and to get him to take the handcuff off of the man. When they got there, they smelled a strange pungent odor, and they went inside, and Jeffrey's sitting there trying to explain. One of the officers goes into the bedroom where he finds pictures, because remember, Jeffrey Dahmer used to always take photos before and after of his victims. And when he would cut them open and, you know, dismember their bodies and remove their organs and all these sick things and decapitate their heads, he would take pictures of all of this for his sexual pleasure and gratification for later. Because let's not forget, he was not only a cannibal who loved to eat the dead flesh of these men, he also was a pedophile, and he was into necrophilia. So he would have sex with the corpses. Now, he would later claim that the reason he killed these men and ate them is because they would try to leave him, and he didn't want them to leave. He wanted them to forever be a part of him. So he felt that if he consumed their flesh, that they would be a part of him. Now, I want you to remember something. This is exactly the same thing I've told you about racist devils. Do you see the similarities in them and serial killers? This is why I continuously tell you they are psychopaths or sociopaths, just like serial killers. Just like the serial killers, they have no conscience, they have no remorse. They too used to eat the flesh of our ancestors. Many of them today still are cannibals. Okay? Now, you're not going to hear about that on the lamestream media. But there have been people who have come forward and said that they still engage in cannibalism. Okay? Donald Marshall has talked about this. So with that all being said, these are the things that he did. Now, when the officer found these photos of these dead bodies, the first photo that he actually saw was a photo of a man being skinned, okay, of his body being skinned. And so then as he's looking at this photo, he looks around and realizes he's in the exact same room where this occurred. So he yells to his partner, and he says, "Grab him." Okay, so then they place Jeffrey under arrest. And then later, when they search the apartments, they find a decapitated head in a cardboard box in the refrigerator with severed hands, one on either side of the head. When they look inside the freezer, they find livers, hearts, thigh muscles, and biceps, all wrapped nice and neatly in paired packages in the freezer. And Jeffrey had planned on eating those things later. Okay? That's what he said. So it's all very sick and disgusting. So anyway, he went to trial. And when he went to trial, they gave him what is called a bifurcated trial, which basically is where they have two parts of the trial. The first part is to determine whether or not he was guilty of killing those men, in which he was found guilty. The second part was to determine whether or not he was insane or sane. Well, they determined that he was absolutely sane, because the law in Milwaukee is, if you know what you're doing is wrong, but yet you continue to do it, then you're sane. You're not crazy. And as I've told you numerous of times, these people who know what they're doing, they're not sane. And though, you know, sometimes the Mayo Clinic loves to try to say, well, they had mental issues, they had to have been crazy and they're incompetent and all this. No, when you know you're doing something, and in fact, when you try to cover up the crime, you have common sense, you know exactly what you're doing. And in fact, several psychiatrists said that Jeffrey Dahmer was not insane at all. He was completely sane, that he was just evil. And that's absolutely what he was. He was just evil. Another thing too, while he was on probation and no probation officer ever visited him, called him, or checked up on him in any way, he was also supposed to see a psychologist at least once a month, I believe. I think it was like once a month. But he was also supposed to, be visiting a psychologist. Now, many a times when he would go to visit the psychologist, he had just finished killing someone the day before, maybe even the same day in some instances. So they obviously didn't realize that this man was a psychopath, right? Which is a character flaw, not a mental illness. Okay, so then after he was found guilty, he actually gave a 60-hour confession. He gave a 60-hour confession, and his attorney, Gerald Boyle, said himself that Dahmer had no conscience and there was no hope ever for rehabilitation. Okay? Now, also, he ended up going to, when he went to prison, he ended up trying to get into Christianity, and trying to save his soul by, going to church, and then, going to the chapel or whatever. And then he met a preacher by the name of Roy Radcliffe from the Church of Christ. And he asked this pastor to baptize him. So the pastor agreed. Now, the pastor said the reason that he agreed to baptize him is because some people may think that, oh, he was, a serial killer, you shouldn't baptize him. But he said he baptized him. He agreed to do it because Jesus died for everyone's sins and Jesus forgives everyone. That's what he said. So anyway, he also went on to say something that I thought was so crazy, the pastor that is. He said that Jeffrey Dahmer never showed any emotion towards his victims other than love. He never seemed to show any hate or malice. Excuse me, but how was he showing love after he slaughtered them, drugged them, slaughtered them, molested their bodies, dismembered them, and ate them? How does that sound like anything that somebody's showing love? But this is what he said, okay? So anyway, I just thought that was so ridiculous and so very crazy, right? How can you sit there? And here's another thing too. They tried to make up so many excuses for Jeffrey Dahmer's BS. Yes, they absolutely did, okay? They were saying things like, he had abandonment issues because his mother and father left him after they got a divorce. And that's why he was afraid for the guys to leave him. And saying things like, he had issues when he was growing up. And all these different sorts of things, and saying that, there was mental illness in his family, said there was a history of mental illness in his family. But he wasn't mentally ill, though, according to numerous psychiatrists. So I don't even know why they tried to bring that up, but that's what the Mayo's explaining. They always want to have an excuse. Always want to have an excuse for when one of their people does something crazy and treacherous. Okay? There's no excuse for his behavior other than the fact that he was a psychopath. All right? He wasn't a sociopath because there was no event in his life that traumatized him to the fact that he would start doing these things. He was born this way, clearly, because, as I said, he first started being interested in dead carcasses of animals when he was only 8 years old, taking them and, cutting them open and playing around with the bones and all of that sick stuff and bringing them home and having a collection of them, even of dead raccoons, dogs, cats, you name it. In fact, one of his friends talked about Jeffrey going on a fishing trip with him, and he caught a fish once, and after he caught the fish, it was still alive, of course, and he took a knife and just started stabbing the fish repeatedly and cutting it all open. And then his friend said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "I just wanted to see what the inside of it looked like." So clearly he was sick, okay? And I don't mean mentally sick. I mean just sick as in crazy. It's to the point of being evil, right? Just an evil, wicked person. That kind of crazy, not mentally crazy. Okay, so then also on November of 1994, while Dahmer was in prison, now I thought this was so ironic, and this was clearly karma. While he was in prison, a man by the name of Christopher Scaver, a black man, he took a barbell. He took a hand barbell, and he went up to Jeffrey Dahmer and asked him, "Did you really do all those things?" And likely he was asking him for the simple fact that many of those men, most of those men that Dahmer killed were black men. And I believe that's why they made excuses for him as well. That's what I think. Had he killed all white men, I doubt they would have been making excuses trying to say that he had mental health issues, that were a history in his family, abandonment issues and all of that. But so anyway, the guy asked him, did you really do those things of which you're accused? And he said yes. And so the guy bludgeoned him upside the head until he was dead. Okay, and then he also, after he was done with Jeffrey, he went over to another man by the name of Jesse Anderson and bludgeoned him and killed him as well. Now, the difference in the two is that Jesse Anderson had defensive wounds on his body, showing that he put up a struggle. He tried to fight for his life. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't have any defensive wounds. In fact, Scaver said later that Dahmer didn't even make a sound when he was bashing him and bludgeoning him and killing him. He didn't even make a sound. So apparently he knew that he deserved to die, because clearly he did, right? Now, here's something that I thought was also strange. The preacher, the same one who agreed to baptize Dahmer, Roy Radcliffe, said that he had become friends with Dahmer. Who wants to be friends with a pedophile, cannibal, murderer? Okay? And psychopath to boots. But he said that he had developed a friendship with Dahmer, and so he was, upset about his death. He felt sad for him. Empathy. But Candace Owens loves to say that black people have empathy and praise our criminals. Okay? And even the Milwaukee cop who had worked on the case, Kennedy, he actually said that he was shaken up about it. He said he was a bit shook up because he said that actually he didn't really think that that should have happened. In fact, I'm going to let you listen to the audio from where he talks about that. I'm going to first read the Fair Use Act. Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing.
All that I'd done for him and how thankful he was that I was in his life, that I hadn't given up on him. The only emotion he ever had confessed to regarding his murders was love. It wasn't hatred at all. And I never saw a sense of malice or anger or hatred toward any of his victims at all.
In November 1993, 2 inmates were killed by delusional schizophrenic Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institute. One was Jesse Anderson, the other was Jeffrey Dahmer.
Scarver got a piece of equipment off an exercise machine, crept up upon Dahmer, and bludgeoned him to death, and then crossed the gymnasium and bludgeoned to death Anderson.
He knew that he was going to be killed if he asked for the general population. And talking to the investigators said that the gentleman that was killed with him, Jesse Anderson, had all kinds of defensive marks where he tried to stop Carver. But Jeff...
Now, let me point out something. The first man you heard talking that was actually saying that Jeffrey never had any bad things to say about the victims, he only said there was no malice or whatever, that was Roy Radcliffe, the pastor who agreed to baptize him. Now, this person talking here is the police officer, Officer Kennedy, who actually worked on the case. Okay, this is him now talking.
Dahmer had no defensive marks on him, that all his strikes were from the beginning, from the head. And a very interesting thing, what I thought was interesting, was he was killed with a hand barbell, which is the same instrument he used to kill his very first victim.
He was a young man that I felt a friendship toward, and I'd lost a friend, and so I was very much in shock and disbelief about it at first.
I felt somewhat sorry for the man being beaten to death by another inmate. Didn't seem right. It's not supposed to be what happens in prison.
It did kind of shake me up a little bit. I don't know if this means I'm, not the macho guy I wanted to be, but I felt really conflicted about it. Because I had got to know him, I saw him as a very tragic figure. I guess I felt sad that he was dead because I don't believe anybody needs to die like that.
Now, you heard that, right? That last person talking that said he thought it was a very tragic death because he doesn't think anyone deserves to die like that. That was a police officer from Milwaukee, okay? Kennedy. That was his name. I can't remember his first name. But you also heard the pastor saying that he developed a friendship with him. And then you heard another man saying that those things aren't supposed to happen in prison and that he felt bad for him. Now, I want you to pay attention to how the Mayo Clinic, the Hellman's crew, how they can have empathy and sympathy for their own killers who not only go out here and just kill people, but they have necrophilia with their corpses, dismember their corpses, and then eat their corpses. They do all of these wicked and heinous things, and they have sympathy and say that, oh, he seemed like a nice person, and they make all these excuses. But these are the same wicked demons and devils who will make every excuse as to why a black person who simply resisted brought their own death upon themselves, and they have no empathy or remorse, not even a shred, for a black person. I want you to pay attention to that. Very important that you notice that. These devils, now if they aren't racist, you tell me what is. They actually had sympathy for Jeffrey Dahmer? Are you kidding me? One of the most prolific serial killers in the United States, the divided snakes. But yet, these same group of people will make up every excuse for why Jacob Blake deserved to be shot in his back 7 times. They'll say, well, oh, he had warrants for sexual assault. Warrants? He wasn't convicted. He hasn't even gone to trial. Jeffrey Dahmer was a whole convicted felon, a whole convicted murderer. Okay? A pedophile. A cannibal. You name it. But they have empathy for him. Just like they have empathy for Kyle Rittenhouse, though he killed 2 people and injured a 3rd. They have empathy for their people, and they don't care what they do. These racist demons, that's who I'm talking about. They absolutely don't, okay? They are soulless, absolutely. None of them have a conscience. See, this is what I'm trying to prove my point to say. The reason they have empathy for their own people and none for black people is because I told you numerous times all racist white people are in fact psychopaths or sociopaths, just like serial killers. And that is why they have compassion for them, because they're one and the same. They are one in the same. Okay? How do you have compassion for somebody who killed 17 people? And here's the thing. Now, they say the time span of his murders was from 1978 to 1991, right? Now, pay attention to this. The first man that he killed, or the first boy that he killed, was a 16-year-old in 1978. At the time, Dahmer himself was only a teenager. He was 18. Now, he didn't kill anyone else until 9 years later. Okay, until 9 years later. So with that being said, the 16 out of the 17 victims that he murdered, he killed them within a 4-year span. Within a 4-year span, he killed 16 men. But they have sympathy for him. And if that man by the name of Tracy Edwards had not gotten away and fled out of there and gotten a police officer to help him, no telling how many more he would have killed. Because you see, this is the police's fault as far as I'm concerned, because nobody checked up on him while he was on probation. Nobody bothered to arrest him when that boy, that little 14-year-old boy, ran out of his house saying that he needed help, that he was clearly trying to escape and didn't want to go back. They literally took him right back to Dahmer because he's white and he said so. See how dangerous that mentality is? But this is what they do. This is what they do, people. So with that all being said, I'm going to go ahead and close out this live. Yes, absolutely, Shungri. Psychopaths. Absolutely. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close out this live. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in once again. Don't forget that you can follow me on Instagram at Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur. You can follow me on Twitter at DGoddess27. Monday through Fridays, you can find me on FlyNubianQueenTV.com for Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur with your morning wake-up call. Did the police get in trouble for giving them? No, absolutely not, Water Sniper. When do the police ever get in trouble? They don't care if the person they do these things to is not white like them. They're not going to get in any trouble whatsoever. They just aren't. Thank you, Mob Boss Father. So with that being said, until next time, family, I will talk to you all again soon. Peace.